Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. Lauren Davis is an occultist who uses Butoh, bloodletting, soundbaths, and performance art. This episode mentions self-harm, suicide, and cancer. Hey everyone, this is Ali Words, and today we have Lauren Davis. Could you tell us about yourself, Lauren?
Hi, yeah, I am an extreme ritual performance artist, originally from California and now living in New Mexico, the land of enchantment. I have been doing ritual performance art for almost 20 years now. I think it's about 16 years, 17 years, something like that. Started out just moving my body, doing a lot of belly dance, and got really interested in the darker arts as far as utilizing fire and blood. And then I got involved with a suspension troupe in Oakland, California, that kind of led me on my path to what I do today.
That is awesome. So what is it that led you to doing all this stuff?
Man. So it's, I always had, a huge curiosity, towards the occult. Since I was really young, I just was like a little sponge, and I wanted to, learn everything I could about different cultural practices, around the world. And, the Bible thumping father figure was, definitely, that kind of energy coming at me just made me want to rebel and look into it more. So I started pretty early with that, and I had always, had like very artistic tendencies. I I was also just thinking about this recently. I have been organizing performances since I was a child. I would gather all the kids from the neighborhood and, put some kind of choreography together, and we'd put a little show together for all the kids' family and friends and, siblings and stuff like that. So God, I feel like I've been doing this for so long, but it's just translated in like a totally different way now. So that's kind of where the occult background comes from, and then the performance comes from. I will say, I was a cute little goth kid, and into a lot of the darker stuff, into darker music, got into experimental music, and that led me to like Topi. And so I really got kind of invested in this joining of, art and occultism hand in hand. And that was like later on in high school. I then found a occultist in New York. I think she's in New York now. She goes by Sorceress Cagliostro, and she was really the one who kind of opened my mind to the utilization of blood within her ritual practices. I guess I had thought of that as something sort of archaic at the time, and I didn't really understand that, any kind of opening of one's flesh was technically bloodletting. So even getting tattoos, getting piercings, things like that, those are all forms of bloodletting. And so that kind of really opened my mind. Her discussions on the bloodletting that she was doing to utilize as offerings for these different daemons or deities was really fascinating to me. I was having a lot of sort of paranormal experiences at the time, and was just really starting to open myself at that point to working with demonic energies or spiritual energies, whereas before, when I was a child, I was much more afraid of connecting with those energies, but still was experiencing them. So cute little goth kid grows up and got really bored going to the goth club, doing the goth thing. And I ended up going on this really amazing blind date with this woman who we had been chatting with each other for, a couple of weeks, and she wanted to take me to this specific place. And this specific place, it was called Orbis Nex, and it was a underground event that was hosted in Oakland, and it was like deep within the caverns of a warehouse in the gnarliest parts of Oakland. And so I'm letting this woman take me on this journey to get to this, which is like very old school, like a rave. Like you get little breadcrumbs to go here and knock on this door and punch in this keypad number to get to this event. And that event, oh my God, when I walked in, it literally changed my entire view on how to experience art, how I was experiencing music at the time, in taking just how I was relating with people and the deeper levels in which I felt like I found my people, and so that event I blame solely for the art that I do today. If it wasn't for that event, I wouldn't be doing what I do today. So I thank that woman endlessly, which it's really funny because she took me on that date and I never saw her again until the last time that event held. They held its little funeral for when they decided to end that event. And I only saw her on that first date and the last evening of that event. So it was, I just had to tell her, like, this has come full circle for me. It's gotten me involved in so many different things and so many different artistic, creative projects, ritual projects. I made so many different friends within that realm, doing experimental music, black metal music. Just wow. I felt very spoiled with how I was able to kind of come upon that and just sponge off of what was going on at that event.
That's an exciting origin story. I like that.
Yeah. I was so entranced by it. The 10-year anniversary after, this event had closed, I am still friends with the woman who put it on back then. And I asked her, I said, do you mind if I get the logo that you created for the event tattooed on me? Because it changed my life. And she was like, oh my God, like I never thought that anybody would ask me something like that. And she allowed it, and I showed it to her, and she did not expect how large it was going to be. It takes up my full from my knee to my ankle. It's huge. Yeah. It's a big honor to me to have experienced something so special in such a really special, unique time in Oakland. Like there was really nothing. This was pre-Ghost Ship, when there was a lot more underground things happening in that area, and this was just like the special one out of all of them for me, at the very least. The women that were putting it together were three occultists, and would make their own tinctures for the bar. They had drink names like Peacock Bile, and I mean, I was entranced. Nothing was lit by electronic light. It was all candlelit, walls of temple incense, and just some incredible performances from all around the world. I have no idea how she had the connection with all of these different sorts of acts throughout the world, but it was phenomenal, and it just exposed me to so much at such a young age.
Yeah, that sounds intense.
Yeah, indeed it was.
So I see that you use Butoh a fair amount in your practice. Could you describe your relationship with Butoh?
Yeah, so funny enough, during the time of Orbis Nex, that's kind of around the time I was starting to do a lot of the belly dance stuff. And it was very popular during that time, like mid 2000s, in the Bay Area, getting very popular. And so I was trying to really figure out how to express myself and the depths of the darkness that I wanted to explore, but within the context of belly dance. And I really just wasn't finding the acceptance, I guess, for what I wanted to do and themes that I wanted to explore. They weren't really accepted too much by the belly dance community. There were smaller like sub communities like Gothic belly dance, tribal fusion belly dance, things like that. But they really were more focused on a very specific type of technique. And I was really I wanted more from it. There was something that was lacking. I wanted more. And I don't even remember exactly where I stumbled upon Butoh. I must have seen it being performed somewhere live. But I was just like, I'm the type of person where if I see something that I really admire, I'm not just an admirer. I want to do it. I want to get involved like immediately. And so I believe I saw this and I was just like, yes, that's what I want to do. That's it right there. I had been banned from a couple of belly dance convention shows because the themes that I was bringing were not deemed quote unquote family friendly. So, and really I was just like, I was doing a xenomorph piece. It wasn't like anything that, extreme, but
I like xenomorphs, but doesn't it involve like, one of the original premises of the movie is that it's the horror involved with men being subjected to oral rape, right?
Sure,
and impregnation.
sure.
So that,
Yeah.
I'm not sure many parents want their kids thinking about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I mean, very loosely translated into like a belly dance performance.
Okay, yeah.
They weren't coming away with it from that. It was literally just because I was, drooling some black goo out of my mouth, and that probably scared a couple kids.
That is pretty scary.
that was really just it. So I kind of just set that aside and was like, I have that in my tool belt whenever I need it. And then I started taking Butoh workshops, which again in the Bay Area and that time there was a plethora of that going on. So and I remember some of my Butoh teachers actually telling me, man, your the movements that are coming from like your core and your hips are so strong. And I was like, yeah, because I'm a belly dancer. And that's exactly where I'm trying to break that in myself to get away from having all of that movement just kind of stuck in that area because I was trained that way. So that was a fun challenge for me.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of Butoh has to do with, well, I guess I see more than two strands, but two related strands of approaches to Butoh. And one of them is trying to break away from all of your conditioned movement, all of the ways you've learned moving. Mm-hmm. But then also on the other side, tapping into like instinctual movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess part of that does involve, I guess the movements that are conditioned into you aren't really instinctual, are they?
I guess they wouldn't be instinctual, but if you're coming at it from a mindset of I'm just going to let whatever is coming out of me just flow, and you're in a mindset of kind of stepping beside yourself and letting your body just take over, it's going to do what it's going to do,
Yeah. It'll do the things that you've drilled into your muscle memory, at least some of the
time. Sure. And then if you kind of, I don't know, for me at least, I can't really, or have not achieved a point at which I'm completely out of my mind when I'm doing this. So I do kind of check back in with myself. And if I do feel that my body is kind of getting locked up into something that I've done repetitively, then I might want to try to push it in a different direction and a different body part, or explore that in some way.
For sure. Now I have to ask, have you experimented with hallucinogens in Butoh?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Not on stage, but definitely at home.
Same.
I am kind of a grandma when it comes to the performance art that I do, that I'm not doing anything that's going to put me too far out of my head while there's a lip with a few feet
Yes.
that I might be able to fall off of.
But you say that you've never like gotten fully out of it while doing Butoh?
In terms of like doing psychedelics while I'm doing Butoh?
Maybe I misheard. A minute ago you said in terms of like your movement that you feel like you've never like totally lost control?
Yeah, so I'm able to, when I'm sober and I'm doing Butoh and I'm allowing myself to get into a specific headspace, I still can kind of find myself like tapping back in, checking back in with myself, where when I'm just sort of letting my body flow, letting it do its thing, and I have stepped aside, I kind of come back and check in, especially if I feel like I'm doing something repetitively. And I want to push it in another direction. So it's kind of like I take a back seat and then I just kind of check in with the driver for a minute and go, yeah, I think we need to take a left-hand turn here,
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Take the left-hand path,
So how do psychedelics change what it's like for you to do Butoh?
Oh, man. I think really I get a lot more visuals because when I'm doing Butoh sober, I find myself closing my eyes a lot of the time. And so with, I generally use like either mushrooms or DMT to Butoh with alongside, and I get a lot of visuals from those. So I'm almost able to play with these kaleidoscopic images that I'm seeing. One of the last times I did this, I had like a really, I don't want to call it a flashback, but I feel like I was tapping, this was with DMT, I was tapping into this like ancestral trauma, and I was able to sort of see all these little tiny itty bitty people that were contained within these snowflakes that were just like shooting at me, and it was very difficult to feel that I could move, much less move in a forward direction. And I was just really trying it's like, it's hard to explain because I wasn't watching myself, but I was really trying to move with the movement of these snowflakes that I was witnessing falling, and trying to really get into and understand what was going on with these ancestors that were laying in the lines of the snowflakes, if that makes any sense at all.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. I was even like thinking about maybe the symbolism of the snowflakes and how they might relate to you. The first thing that popped in my head is that snowflakes, just because of the shape of water molecules, they form hexagons, which is 6. And I know that you're a Satanist, but are you a Satanist? I feel like you've called yourself one.
Sure. I mean, I've called myself one. It's
okay.
Kind of an overarching term that I just use when I really don't feel like getting into it and explaining.
Okay, so it's an oversimplification, but yes, aesthetic vibes, sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But then that ties into the Kabbalistic tree of life with the 6th sphere, and then maybe there's something about like frozen water.
So, yeah, I mean, I haven't really explored the frozen water aspect of it. That's something that I never put 2 and 2 together with that.
Oh, you know what? You do a lot with bloodletting, right? They could be like frozen like blood is like blood that is no longer moving.
But I didn't even think about it in terms of blood. No, that's interesting. That gives me a whole different perspective on it, actually.
Huh. I will say that I find it highly profitable to record myself when I'm doing intoxicated Butoh. My preference is actually, I like to do it for a longer period of time. typically I would use like San Pedro and edibles, like THC edibles,
Mm-hmm.
as compared to like mushrooms because it's all day.
Yes.
And then I'll do like alternating periods of I'll do Butoh for like maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and then I'll immediately watch the recording of that, and then like repeat until I'm getting a little exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that that works pretty well for like integrating and remembering what just happened a little bit. I often like write or
Mm-hmm.
take notes.
Oh, neat. Neat. Yeah. No, I kind of just jam. I mean,
That's how I started, but then I was
yeah, I just get
yeah.
into it. I just jam, and then if I have, I don't remember that I have recorded. I'm sure there's one or two.
I just use a
In
shitty webcam in my living room.
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
I
anything
use my
fancy.
phone. Yeah, I use my phone. And I don't. I don't. I definitely have not posted any of them, but I'm pretty sure I have one or two in there that I've gone back and I thought that they were really interesting. I think it's also really interesting that I take more of a sort of a ritualistic approach to the creating a sacred space when I'm doing these psychedelics during that kind of Butoh movement. Um, Whereas, in the other context, it would just be like, I'm in the studio, I'm experimenting with things, I'm writing stuff down. This, I really create that ritual sacred space. Just, in my living room or something like that. I have the incense going, I've got the music real loud. It's a different experience for me than when I'm like getting ready for a show or
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
definitely. That's cool. Um, Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do with bloodletting. It sounds like you might have a broader understanding of what bloodletting is than a lot of people. Like when I hear bloodletting, I actually don't use blood. I mean, I guess I have a couple times, but like the first image that pops in my hand is like someone with the wavy dagger poking their their palm or whatever over the brass bowl, right? But I feel
Yeah.
like you have a broader understanding of it in your practice.
Sure. It definitely I will go back to, again in high school, I was a self-harmer. That was something that was that I really didn't understand too much about. I wasn't necessarily doing these things because I hated myself, though there were times when that was the case. Um, and when I ran into Sorceress Cagliostro and her books on utilizing blood within magic, it just really inspired me, and it really kind of pointed me in a direction where I can be doing this thing um, towards a like for a direction, for a purpose, with an intention, instead of just getting kind of blood high is what I call it. And so later on down the line, when I started working with the suspension troupe, and saw them doing this flesh hook suspension and really presenting it in a very beautiful way, this thing that can look like very much like Hellraiser, and spooky and whatever, but they made it so beautiful. I think one of the first performers that I saw do a suspension was within this dome, and she was suspended with, I think she was like 20 feet in the air and had like a 13-foot white dress on and was doing very Butoh like movements in the air while she was suspended. And it was just like one of the most gorgeous things I had ever seen. And when I really started to dive into suspension and understand that this is not a new practice, this is actually something very old. I started delving more into body modification in and of itself, and the history on that goes back and back and back, and so it really it almost feels like these practices have largely been lost, or their intention has been lost nowadays. Whereas before, when people started to understand that blood carried some kind of currency and it was important to life itself, they started utilizing it to honor their gods or protect themselves or manifest or whatever it was that they were trying to do at the time. A lot of it was about honor. And I started to kind of utilize it in that way for myself, doing suspension for me. So the Mandan tribe and the Lakota tribes, it's usually like a practice where it's for a man to become a warrior. And so it became this sort of feminist thing to me for a female, especially a woman of size, to be doing this practice. And it was honoring my divine femininity or my feral femininity as well, because it feels so primal to do this thing. So yeah, I really started relating it to that. I started learning more about Fakir Musafar, which he's like the granddaddy of modern primitivism.
What name did you say?
Fakir Musafar.
Okay.
He was amazing. He passed away a couple years ago, but this guy, was very inspired in like the 1950s he was very inspired by National Geographic and seeing what all of these tribes were doing around the world in relation to body modification. And so he had the wherewithal to actually photograph himself doing these rituals in his basement. And so there's these amazing pictures of him when he was very, very young, doing corsetting, putting, they call it ball dancing. So they take like a weighted ball and they'll pierce, some twine into the flesh, and then they'll hang the weighted ball from that and they dance with it. So he was seeing all of these like rituals around the world and trying to kind of emulate what was happening with that and experience this body play for himself. And ended up actually creating a magazine called Body Play. He was very involved with the BDSM side of things, but also the ritual side of things. And so just a really super influential person that seemed to really get it. And I was very fortunate enough I took his piercing class back in, I think, 2014. And he really had a great emphasis on how this type of work, this piercing, and is bloodletting, and it is a type of ritual, and we do need to honor it. It's not just about, this Aerosmith music video, Alicia Silverstone getting her belly button pierced and she thinks she's cute kind of thing. It's not like that. It's much deeper. And no shame to anybody who's just in it for aesthetics. It's totally valid as well. There's a seat for everybody at the table, but there is definitely a deeper level to it. And also understanding that even tattoo is from an ancient ritual. The word tattoo is from the practice of the actual tapping of the tattoo. But yeah, it just my world, my mind got blown. My world was blown open by all of these different practices, and I started to understand how to incorporate that into my own esoteric practices, and then kind of combining that with the performance art and the Butoh, which already felt very meditative and like I was entering an altered headspace. It felt very natural for these things to all congeal together.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I was just looking at some pictures of Fakir Musafar, and there'll be a link in the description, but this is some pretty intense stuff, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a shame he's not around anymore.
Yeah, he passed away. He was ready to go. He was ready for the transition. He knew it was coming. He was a light. I really had the treat of in one of my suspension troops that I was in, we were asked to do a show with him at Dallas SusCon. I think maybe, I want to say 2015, 2016, something like that. And we got to perform with him. We got to sit down. We got to write ritual with him. And it was just such an honor. He even brought some of his originally handmade in the garage cheek spears that a friend and I got to use. And it was so funny because he was so traditional about how to utilize something like a cheek spear. Traditionally, the cheek spear is meant to be a ritual of silence and reflection. And we're on this convention floor doing this piercing, and I have people coming up and asking me questions, and I have the spear in my mouth already, and I'm trying to answer their questions, and he just like snaps at them, and he's like, "She's in a vow of silence right now. Don't talk to her." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, grandpappy, so shut them up."
Oh, that is great. Yeah. How do you go about designing a ritual? Or it might be better to talk about a specific ritual if there's one you'd like to discuss, but like, how does it work for me from conception to like planning and then execution?
There's definitely a myriad of ways that it can come together. Sometimes it kind of comes to me as a concept of like, oh, this act and this act merged would be really interesting, doing this one specific thing and kind of, having this idea over here about maybe the intention or whatever. Melding those ideas can come together that way, and then the ritual built sort of around the intention there and the action there. And then a lot of times, especially when I'm asked to perform at a space specifically, there's usually some kind of theme. And when there's a theme, I like to kind of dive into that with the organizers and kind of explore what it is that what their intention is behind the theme. I'll talk about one specifically because this one just happened a couple of months ago. But I performed for this is kind of like I don't want to call it satanic because it was more than satanic, but it was a marketplace called Blasphemy. And they were, this is in LA, they were doing, marketplace events. So there was a bunch of vendors, and then all throughout the day, there was like some dark drag queens doing their thing. It was amazing. It was wonderful, great crowd. And then at the end of the night, they wanted to have this ritual. And so the theme of that one specifically was March of the Sticks. And so I really started to kind of dive into what would that look like? How would that be interpreted in within a group ritual setting? I had a bunch of friends at that point that I knew that I wanted to incorporate. I just didn't know exactly how I wanted to incorporate them at the time. So I kind of sat back with it. I did a little bit of research, went back to Dante's Inferno and discovered that we were dealing with the fifth circle of hell, which is where a lot of the anguished spirits are. And also that Styx is not just, the river between, life and death, but that it's also a goddess. And so I kind of started to explore, okay, I have 5 individuals that will be accompanying me for this ritual. I do want to incorporate some level of bloodletting because at that point I hadn't for a while. I think my previous performance to that was back in October. And so I was really just feeling quite literally the pull to the pull to do that, to have that be a part of the act. I think my body misses it sometimes when I haven't done it in a while. And so I kind of went with this idea of like, okay, I'm working with a lot of individuals that I either haven't performed with before, maybe they haven't done any sort of bloodletting before. They certainly haven't taken hooks before. So I knew building this ritual around that, like, I'm probably going to be the only one taking hooks. We're probably as a group going to be doing a little bit of bloodletting, but it's going to be the experienced people only. And then from there, it was, I knew that we weren't going to be doing suspension because of the venue. So I was like, okay, then we're doing something on the ground. What are we doing on the ground? What are these anguished spirits trying to get out of this goddess Styx? I took on the role as that river and that goddess within the movements. And I came up with this idea of, like, the anguished spirits utilizing me as a vessel to try and transmute their pain to maybe exit this fifth circle of hell, or maybe get some kind of closure to that anguish. But ultimately, we come back to the idea that, like, you handle your own shit. Like, you can try and call upon and transmute your anger or anguish through something, but ultimately you have to deal with it yourself. So I came up with this idea of having the heaviness of anger represented in chains, and I asked the people who were performing with me to hang things from these chains, whether it was a flag or skulls or bells or whatever it was that was representative to them of their own personal anguish and pain. I wanted their Butoh character that they were putting on to really be themselves, just existing in this fifth circle of hell. And it's funny because there was a lot of, like, obsession about, what do you want this to look like? I'm just like, I want you to look like you, just do you. It really doesn't matter, honestly. But instead of doing flesh pulls against each other, I decided that I would be doing the flesh pulls, and I would be attaching these chains to myself. Or rather, they would be attaching their chains to me, and the chain around them is just a harness. It's locked on them. And so they would come up and clip into me and pull against me in a circle, and in a very chaotic way. I didn't want any sort of control over that. So the idea became sort of like, we create this circle of hell. The goddess comes out as the river. I took on a very, like, fluid movement to come to the center of this circle. And then this goddess is summoned, and essentially she greets each one of these people almost in a way of, like, why am I here? Why are you summoning me? There's anger being sort of pulled out of her through what they're going through, if that makes any sense. And so then their feedback from that was that they would approach me, and they did their own little bloodletting. They had, like, a couple of forehead needles, and so they painted on me either a phrase or a sigil that represented the anger that they were specifically expressing. And I mean, it didn't even have to be like a legible thing. It was just a feeling that they were putting this onto my body. Then they did the bloodletting and clipped into my hook that they were sort of assigned. They all knew which one they were going to go for. And then kind of backed up, let the next person do that, and we went around the circle doing that. And then they did this really amazing pull, and there's no way for you to really guess how that's going to feel. I've done many pulls throughout the years, but never in quite the chaotic circular motion that we were kind of going through. We all kind of built this rhythm, which was very interesting. And it, as chaotic as it was and as painful as it was almost cradling in a way. And then after that happens, I have my my safeties come on stage, and they're disconnecting these people. Their chains are being handed back to them as a representation of, this is your heaviness back at you. You need to do something with this. This is not, we can try to transmute this for you, but that's only going to get you so far. You have to handle your heaviness and your anguish. And so after that, I kind of did this little walk around, and I really like to incorporate the audience in any way that I can. And in this instance, because there was so much biohazard going around, it was really just a connection of energy between me and the audience. And I love looking at people in their eyes. And I kind of made this slow circle around, because the audience was around the circle of us. And I made this slow circle around, and just, I had these blind contacts on. So I couldn't really see who I was looking at, but I just sort of felt, after this like heightened sense of, bodily awareness and kind of, coming out of my mind almost a little bit. I was just sort of feeling for energies that spoke to me in the crowd. Couldn't see who I was gesturing at or looking at, but I got some really amazing feedback the day after, because this was a 2-day event. People were coming up to me, vendors, performers, and just patrons in the crowd, that they were like, you looked at me and I needed that. I started crying. I could tell, I could see some movements where people were like wiping away tears. So I knew that they were getting it. They were feeling it. They were tapping into this very heavy energy of catharsis and letting go. And it meant a lot to me. I mean, the entire crew that I ended up putting together for that show, the next day we couldn't walk 5 feet without somebody stopping us and letting us know how they felt about the performance. And there's a lot of performances, especially in LA, with that kind of extreme piercing vibe, but this was definitely, it carried the emotion and the intention enough that people felt that it was different somehow. Different than just seeing kind of like what I call, bloodletting for a freak show, which is just like, oh, just tits and blood or whatever. But but this definitely had a lot more emotion, a lot more intention.
So I have to ask you now, how do you handle banishing? Because that sounds like it was a pretty intense working.
How do I handle what?
Banishing? Like, do you banish after work like that, or?
So it's interesting. We actually banished in the ritual itself, and we did so by
That's good.
Being very cognizant of which way we were entering or leaving the circle. So entering the circle being, the clockwise, and then exiting the circle, everyone was counterclockwise. So we considered that our banishment of that. And then, of course, there's a ton of grounding that goes on. I learned that lesson very early on in performing in my days in LA, where I was performing so often that I got into this like, okay, put ritual on the side and let's just get this show. This is what needs to happen. I have to direct these people, yada, yada. And I made that mistake once or twice where I wasn't grounding enough, and that energy would get stuck within my body. I would become completely suicidal within 3 days' time, and I would need to reach out for help, whether it was through therapy. I ended up going to a Reiki person who I was really resistant to that sort of white light practice. Oh, yes, I went to a Reiki person and I was really resistant to this concept of white light entering my body. But the person that I ended up going to really understood me and where I kind of came from and where what my practices involved. And she tells me, she goes, I don't want you to think of it as light. I want you to think of it as fire. And we're burning this shit out of you. And I was like, okay, I got you. I got you, girl. Now I understand. Yeah. And it was amazing because, I gave her a loose idea of what had happened, but she had no idea where I had suspended from that evening, when all of this occurred, and where she picked up the majority of the energy that got stuck within me was the exact space that I had been suspending from, which is like the underbust area, which is called the resurrection. Um, so I didn't even prompt her with that. I just told her like this was kind of what the general idea of the ritual was, and I think that that energy is still within me, and I wasn't able to transmute it properly. And I didn't do my grounding right, and she was able to pick up on it, which was really weird. So this actual practitioner also, she had written a book about baptism by fire. So that was really, that kind of stuck out to me, and what I kept thinking of while I was doing this Reiki session. But it is creation and destruction for me, personally. And I see it as something that I can read even. I've done a lot of scrying with fire. So those are kind of the themes that it takes on for me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
So reading your book, I was really interested in kind of how you envisioned, or if you envisioned people utilizing the rituals that are contained within it. Do you kind of want or expect the reader to be taking on those rituals themselves, or what?
That is a complicated question. Part of that is ethics, and then part of that is artistry, execution.
Mm-hmm.
So ethically speaking, there are plenty of rituals in my books that would not be healthy for everyone to perform at all points in their life anyways.
Sure.
And I include that in the warning in them, is that sometimes there are rituals that it would be wise to contemplate but not perform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I do think most of the rituals in my books would be good for most people that would be reading them anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also, seen people go crazy. So like, definitely, they're not like beginner books. I wouldn't want someone to dive too far into actually doing the rituals in, especially my first book, unless they are already very good at banishing and grounding.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's not like an intro level occult book. It kind of assumes that you already know what chaos magic is.
Mm-hmm.
You probably already know how to like do some basic rituals, and you should 100% first ritual you learn should be how to banish effectively.
Right.
But then on the other side, more on the artistry angle, the first book, GPT-3 Technosis, and large sections of the other books are written so that you could perform the rituals. Like they'll describe the things that you make yourself visualize and you feel, and then manifest that into motion via Butoh or some other means, whatever people prefer. It's just dances. It's pretty much always available to you. Even if you are like meditating or astral projecting or something, you can hallucinate the tactile sensation of the dance, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
So like even if you are somewhere, like sitting on a bus or whatever, you could still perform the Butoh within you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side is that it's, especially the first book is written in second person because it makes use of hypnotic language,
Mm-hmm.
especially more so as you get further into the book, like the second half.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess probably starting with the Norn working is where it switches a lot to second person.
Yeah.
The intent being that, like we were just talking about those internal dances, that reading the book itself can be a magical act because it's telling you what you think, what you feel, what you realize. It's meant to be hypnotic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the intent, is that if you're a reasonably skilled occultist, that you can read the book, and if you choose to like intensely visualize and try to experience what's in the book with your imaginal skills, that can be a ritual on its own. But then I also try to write things in ways that you could perform them, unless that part of the text is like 100% visionary. But even then, with a visionary text, you can perform it via Butoh. You very strongly visualize and feel the visionary text, all the elements of it, and then your body expresses that however it is that it moves.
Yes, yes. Awesome. That, I mean, it really, when I was going about reading this first book, it harkened back to Austin Osman Spare for me and his writings. And I really took those in interpretation as I needed to meditate or get, do some kind of trance dancing to raise my energy so that I could be in an altered headspace to read what it was that he was writing and then interpret that in whatever way I needed to interpret that. So as I was moving through this book, I kind of got the same feeling that I would need to enter an altered headspace in order to interpret the text itself and then further interpret that in my bodily movement.
Yeah, that's exactly how I approach it.
Awesome.
Later on, that's like the core technique that I use to build my my magical language. Really, it's a grammar for making your own magical languages, and I've made my own with that grammar. In that, do you know what a Butoh fu is?
No, it's a Butoh fu.
Tatsumi Hijikata, one of the originators of Butoh, developed a Butoh fu, which is like a system for performing Butoh. The way he did it is he had these big journals where he cut out pictures, mainly from like magazines or art books, of different modernist paintings, like Gustav Klimt showed up a lot, to demonstrate poses or at least vibes that you would try to experience. Then each one of these pictures, they had a name, so we could tell them to like do the ash walk. And then if the person was like, they didn't know what it was, he could pull out his book and be like, here's some collaged imagery of that'll make you feel like the ash walk. And then here's like a bit of poetry that describes what you're supposed to be experiencing while you do the ash walk. And then a collection of all those entries of like, here's the name of it, here's a picture, here's something to read. That's the Butoh fu, and it forms like your own dialect of Butoh.
Gotcha. So this is what they were talking about when they, when I go back in, the history books, and they're talking about the vocabulary that he was coming up with. Is this that Butoh fu is what that vocabulary was?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
And you actually see a little bit of that really early on in GPT-3 Technosis. I think it was on page 30 where it was like trying to come up with different ways to make like object or verb oriented Butoh, and then like assigning meanings and things to different objects. And that's where the next book in the series picks up. But I used this technique you were just talking about to magically, ritually charge each of those entries. I call them phenomena of my own Butoh fu, suburban Butoh fu. So that's like the core practice that like charges the magical system for you, that makes it magical. And then once you've done that, you have all these magically charged bits of dance, imagery, meaning that you can use to write rituals, or it's a full language.
Oh, so. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And I also really love this idea of creating a book of visual imagery to kind of encapsulate a feeling. because sometimes it's really hard. I've taught, some introductory Butoh workshops and things like that. I always let people know, like, I'm not a professional. I just love sharing this with people, but I give them usually like a kind of a short background, and then we go over some very basic movements. But yeah, I have a hard time sometimes describing what it is that I mean when I'm trying to get them to understand a specific movement, and I end up kind of gravitating towards emotions, whereas I feel like almost giving them imagery might even be easier to communicate. I'm such a visual person, so
Yeah, I think the way I do it, and I think in theory this is the best way. Not that I have the best execution ever, but in theory I think this is the best way to teach this sort of movement practice. Is that you want to include as many modalities as possible.
mm-hmm.
So in my language, Vibok, for each of these, they're root words, but I also call them phenomena. Each of the root words, there's a static posture. So you can just look at a picture. That's a picture of just like me, black and white. You might have seen them before, just like in a weird pose.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also more like psychedelic AI generated imagery, which for anyone listening that is maybe iffy on AI, you probably wouldn't have made it this far into my podcast. But you'll note Tatsumi Hijikata uses collage. So that basic idea of like combining little bits of everything to produce something that's novel is it's right there at the beginning of Butoh. But then more like psychedelic imagery to show what people can visualize. And then text can help you occupy like your word-based mind and elaborate the relationships between different things, like what this symbol means, how you can... I guess we don't have a good way of communicating tactile sensation as much. And then there's also a musical melody that goes with each one. And the idea being there are all these different senses, these different aspects of your human experience, so that you can imprint yourself for each of these root words on all of those different layers. And some people will be better at the music or better at the postures or better at Butoh within those postures, which is how I use the postures. So like there's like a basic pose, but then you move around a lot within it, trying to like express the movements of the meaning of the object. I think that's the best way to get a large audience, is because some people just be drawn more to the pictures or the words or the whatever else.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think that would be a great way to kind of give people an introduction to Butoh. And something that I hadn't even really considered, to give them a visualization like that would. I think a lot of people that are attracted to Butoh are attracted to what is happening visually, and then they kind of secondarily think about like what is going on within that person as they're performing. So it's yeah, it kind of covers those two bases. I like that a lot. I was really just so curious about how you wanted the person who was reading to interpret that, and kind of what your intent was with writing that. I thought that was really interesting.
I've spoken with people who like... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I've spoken with people who have... one person in particular read the whole book in a single day and like actively performed every ritual in the book. And that... I didn't do the whole book in a single day. It takes longer to write it than to read it. But I did do all the rituals in there, and I think it was for the best for me. But I'm hesitant to tell people exactly how to use a grimoire in general, as well as my own, just because I've seen people fuck themselves over a bit with magic. So I want people to to contemplate them and try to pick the ones that they think will be best for them, and then kind of pivot when they see the folly of their limited perspective.
Yeah, I've definitely fucked myself over. Both physically and spiritually, I think, within Butoh practices. Physically, oh man, I tore my rotator cuff getting into such a headspace where I was moving so frantically that I threw my arm back in such a way that just, I heard a pop, and I knew from there. I was like, oh no, what did I do?
Yeah, I did something like that with my hip.
Yeah, yeah,
And I've recovered,
yeah.
but that kind of puts a damper on me, especially as I get older. I'm only 32, but I am getting older. Um, Doing like really intense, sincere Butoh, and that's kind of what pushed me a little bit more towards making a postural language that you can do Butoh within, because it becomes a little bit more like Tai Chi, but you're allowed to like be ecstatic within it.
Yes, yes.
But I think you'll see that there are a lot of, especially older Butoh artists, that move really slowly. It's probably good for trance, but I think there are certain practical benefits to not throwing yourself at the floor too much.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that. But I also, when I had this injury, and I'm still, dealing with the tail end of that having happened. I largely have a lot of the movement and everything back with that arm, but I really leaned into utilizing that within the context of Butoh, and having this physical pain, leaning into that physical pain, and trying to almost even have this creative restriction because of it, which I love. I love having a little bit of creative restriction. It kind of helps me. I'm like constantly chewing on problems, so I'm like, how, both within my life and just like creatively. So it gave me something to sort of focus on, but also step aside, if that makes sense. Knowing that I almost envisioned like doing some kind of shibari where I really couldn't use it. Like I was really limited towards how I could move my body with this arm pinned down. We hear about Kazuo Ono performing into his hundreds or something like that. I think he was like 102 or 101, and he was in his wheelchair. And I can't even imagine seeing that kind of performance where he was extremely limited in his bodily movement, and yet still working the practice.
Yeah. I think it was in the book Body as a Vessel, where it talks about, I don't know if it's Tatsumi Hijikata describing his own childhood, or the author talking about his childhood, but there was a thing where I guess there was a way they carried kids around in Japan where their like legs were bound into like a sort of like a lotus type position,
yes, yes.
in like a backpack or a basket you'd wear on your back kind of thing. And that is one of that restricted movement, and Tatsumi Hijikata's own like anxiety and disgust are one of the seeds of Butoh. The sort of like restricted, frail, incomplete movement is part of what Butoh came from. So
I love that. And that also reminds me of a specific form of body modification that came from the Chinese, which was the lotus foot. The higher like royalty, if you were considered either royalty or like of higher status, they would bind the women's feet in one sense to prevent them from running away. And I think there were some instances of people who were workers or slaves even, that they were bound just to keep them from running away. But it was also a sign of status where you didn't have to be on your feet. You were just sort of served. And then for the lower class, it was like just this excruciating. I mean, it was excruciating either way, but they had to actually physically work on their feet while these foot bindings were going on. And I don't know that anybody is still practicing that anymore, but I think there was some people maybe 10, 15 years ago who were the tail end of that practice, and like 100 years old or something like that. But wow, like, wow, talk about a disabling process to think about. I didn't even realize that that was also kind of in the Japanese culture, where children were being deformed in that way.
I think it was more so to transport them.
Okay.
As a
Okay.
like
It was like the result.
like those baby backpack things where like
Yeah.
they're on the front of you, kind of like that, but like their feet end up stuck,
Um,
not like
like a
permanently, but
baby
when you're in there,
Bjorn.
you're bound a little bit.
Yeah.
You're in
Yeah.
a basket type thing.
Interesting. I want to look at that. I want to see like what the deformity. I just have a curiosity for stuff like that.
Body
Morbid
mod.
curiosity for things like that. Thanks rotten.com from 2009 or something like that, whenever that was happening. Yeah, no, I really I fell in love partially with Butoh because of the acceptance and expression of these things like ticks and falling down and things that were very sort of considered unbecoming of a dancer, things that you would try to avoid doing. That prim and proper technique just was completely like thrown out the window, and I really loved that. And I think part of that was the rebellion against the techniques that I was learning from the belly dance world. So yeah, I just really fell in love with it for those reasons. And then, meshing that within the body modification context or body play context was, I mean, talk about taking you out of your headspace, or, really just like pushing you into a different headspace, I think is what it did for me.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I encourage people, if they, have any interest in utilizing that sort of body modification, there are plenty of resources on how to do it safely. I definitely don't condone people just like busting out a razor or something like that to do these practices. There are definitely proper ways, and aseptic technique to go about doing this in a safe manner. When we're performing these things on stage, like everything's all tarped, there is definite alignment in how we are entering and exiting the stage and where our backstage area is, so that we can really avoid cross contamination. That's huge, and I want to emphasize that, because we're not going out there willy nilly and just flinging blood on people. That's not the move. The people that I learned from in terms of this body play stuff, they really they were often affiliated, if not board members, on the Association of Professional Piercers, which is really the only body modification organization that has a very specific set of standards that they practice. So I encourage people to like look them up. You can also find suspension artists on those pages around the world, and get in touch with those people if these things are of interest to you, to the listener.
Yeah, for sure. I'm writing that down so that we'll get a link to that.
Awesome.
Was it the American Association of Piercers?
The Association of Professional Piercers, APP. I believe the website is called safepiercing.org.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, we're getting towards the end now. Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always doing shows, so if you want to keep up with the shows that I have coming up, I'm on Instagram under Sui Generis Magica. My website, suigenerismagica.com. That's where I post a lot of the up and coming events that I do, whether or not it's performance art, or I know we didn't touch on this too much, but I also do a dark ambient sound bath, which is a Jungian approach to sound healing. It's very much not white light. We delve into the shadows. We're delving into trauma. We're primal screaming. We're we're getting really we're getting really visceral in within that space. So I do that up and down the West Coast, and now bringing it to the Southwest. And I'm really excited to continue with that project as well. That's been a project since 2015.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been great having you on the show, Lauren.
Thank you so much. It was exciting.